Welcome to the 26th week after Pentecost. It is Wednesday, November the 20th, 2024. This is the Manna at the Tap podcast, where we actively seek the spiritual nourishment our souls crave. The daily lectionary reading we explore together is the Manna, designed to nurture our spiritual growth and provide the sustenance our souls need. I'm Gloria, your fellow traveler on this spiritual journey, and together we share insights and interpretations from these readings that enrich our spiritual lives. Today's lectionary reading is part of one of the longest chapters in the Bible. It's 1 Kings chapter 8, and it has 66 verses. But our reading will focus on verses 22 to 30, Solomon's prayer on the occasion of the completion and dedication of the temple in Jerusalem, which he built under the instructions of his father, King David. The lectionary reading can also be found in an almost identical form in 2 Chronicles chapter 6, verses 12 to 42. The chapter begins with the elders of Israel and the heads of the tribes accompanying the ancient Ark of the Lord's covenant to the newly built temple that Solomon had constructed. This ancient structure had been a movable tent and was the same one that was present with Moses and the people throughout their 40-year journey in the wilderness. The Levites brought it in on their shoulders and placed it in the permanent place prepared beneath the wings of the cherubim. The priests sacrificed numberless sheep and cattle that day, and no record exists of how many were sacrificed. While the people were standing, Solomon turned around and blessed them. Then he began his prayer of dedication. In the opening verse of the lectionary reading, verse 22, Solomon stands in the temple before the altar. And it is as if he's in a priestly position, even though he is king. He's leading the nation in prayer. He then spreads out his hands, raising his palms toward heaven in a posture of receptivity. He begins his prayer by praising God, saying, "There is no God like the God of heaven above and the earth below." He praised God for being trustworthy and being faithful in keeping his promises to his father David. The lectionary reading focuses on the power of positive prayers. And 1 King chapter 8 portrays Solomon as a positive figure who followed in his father's footsteps, modeling his prayer life after that of David, the author of the Psalms. The temple is a powerful symbol of God's presence among the people and a place for individual and corporate prayer. It is a place for God's name to dwell. Solomon's speech to the people ended, and his prayer to God began. His bodily posture speaks of the depth of his focus. In verse 27, Solomon wondered if God dwells on the earth because the heavens of heavens cannot contain God, how much less the temple he had built. Solomon perceived himself as God's servant, and he asked God to give attention to his prayer and plea for mercy as he prayed in God's presence that day. You see, the temple was not God's permanent residence, but it was where God was present and accessible. Yet, it is not a place where one can box God in. Solomon understands that the life of God's people is a journey, and God's eyes have guided his people from their ancestors onward. He asks that God's eyes would continue to be open toward the temple day and night, and to continue to remain faithful to his people. Although the temple was central to Israel's worship, it was twice destroyed. And as if in a prophetic moment, Solomon asked God to hear from heaven, God's dwelling place, the people's prayer, when they prayed toward the place from wherever they were, and that God would forgive them. Solomon's prayer continues outside of the lectionary reading, and you may wonder if Gentiles are part of this prayer. In verses 41 to 43, Solomon speaks of the foreigner who will pray toward the temple. He asks God to heed the foreigner's prayer so that all the peoples of the earth may know and fear God as do the people of Israel. Knowing that we are included in God's mercy and we have access to God is wonderful. This inclusion is an excellent reason for us to give thanks and praise. God is present with his people. God hears their prayers, and he responds with his mercy, which is new and fresh every morning. The temple, or a place of worship, as we do here on Tapestry, is a sign and a means of communion with God and deserves to be remembered with honor. This text allows us to remember our ancestors in faith and to give thanks to God for his mercy and including us as his children. Let me just give you a moment to think about what you've heard. And thank you all for joining us, the rest of you. I hope you put on your holy imagination as you saw the elders and the heads of the tribes come in a long procession in front of the people. Imagine how they were dressed in their outfits, and they were following the ancient ark. Um, because the Levites were carrying it on their shoulders. And just envision the priests on the other side making sacrifices. Earlier in chapter 8, we hear that the priests took a break. And when they took a break from sacrificing, the glory of God filled the temple. Then we have Solomon walking into the temple. He blesses the people, and then he turns towards God, towards the altar, and now he becomes a servant before his master God. Outside of the Psalms, Solomon's prayers are magnificent. Israel is now on the world stage. And thanks be to God, we have become part of Solomon's prayers.